Hey, nerdy sports fan here. We're continuing our series breaking down each team's schedule and getting to a win-loss record prediction. How that works is, yes, there are definitely games that I think are going to be a certified W. There are definitely games that I think you're just not going to be up for the task and you're going to get an L hung on you. But the remainder go into a toss-up category because parity exists in this league and, well, the any given Sunday rule is the reason that most bookies make their money. So, at the end of the season breakdown, we will divide up the toss-up category, leaning one way or another from 50-50 based off of strength of schedule, and that is how we get our overall record prediction. Now that we're in the AFC South, let's move into these Houston Texans, shall we? All right, so brief overview of the offseason. Everybody hates what Bill O'Brien has been doing for the past few seasons outside of Bill O'Brien, his front office, and like 50% of the Texans fan base. The other 50% are just crossing their fingers, really hating all the moves genuinely, but not wanting to say anything in case they jinx it. But yeah, this has been weird, okay? He's been trading away top draft picks for players that maybe were worth it, maybe not. I'm not really sure on Laramie Tunsil right now. Has he played well? Yes. Has he been hurt his whole career? At least a few games every season. So, was he worth 2 first-round draft picks? No, definitely not. Absolutely not worth 2 first-round draft picks. But that's what you gave away. So, got to deal with it now. A lot of news was out there about DeAndre Hopkins not necessarily being worth the first-round draft pick that the Bills gave up for Stefon Diggs. If you polled every NFL fan last year and you asked, who is a better wide receiver, Stefon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins? How many people do you think would have selected Diggs? Definitely less than half, maybe a quarter of the people you polled, unless you only polled Minnesota. But who knows what that means for trade value? The word on the street is that O'Brien really just did not like Hopkins' general attitude. The guy would show up late for meetings, miss practices, not really practice at all, and that sort of vibe does not work for the militaresque style that is the Belichick coaching tree that Bill O'Brien comes from. So in that Belichickian style, he decided to move on from the whiny and me-centric veteran and move towards a team-first guy in Brandon Cooks, who he has experience working with in New England. So I see a method there for certain. But I also see the other argument. Whereas when you put all these moves together, you've lost draft capital, you've lost really talented players, because we're taking a few seasons in a row here of who he's allowed to leave, who he's brought in, what he's given up for people, what he's gotten back for people. You have definitely given away a lot of first-round draft picks and not gotten first-round draft picks in return. You've gotten players like Brandon Cooks and Laramie Tunsil, and you gave away players like Jadeveon Clowney and DeAndre Hopkins. So, somehow, big-name talent leaving has not produced first-round draft picks in return. Medium-level talent coming in has produced first-round draft picks going out. That does not say strong front office to me at all. I think the front office work that Bill O'Brien does is absolute garbage. I do think that his coaching has been solid. You can't argue with results. You can't. And I understand. He's got Deshaun Watson. He's got one of the premier young quarterbacks in the league. Of course he should be making the playoffs. But before Bill O'Brien and Deshaun Watson were here, were you really making the playoffs? No. So, the team's not going to argue with these results. until he consistently misses the playoffs or he gets bounced out in the first round a few times. But until then, he's the best situation that they've had in a while. So in spite of all the complaints, you're stuck with Bill O'Brien, in my mind, for at least another 2 years. And he really has to show across those 2 years that he's not the man for the job. The only way that's going to happen is if he misses the playoffs with any sort of consistency. So let's dig into the season. At the Chiefs, you're starting out with a loss. The Chiefs are not in the situation that Houston is. Okay, they have a fantastic young quarterback, much like Houston does, for certain. They don't have the weird roster fuckery going on that you guys do. Okay, they're retaining pretty much their entire Super Bowl championship roster, which is ludicrous. Okay, the amount of cap space that they had couldn't have bought Andy Reid his lunchtime breaks worth of Happy Meals. But they miracled themselves into whatever financial mojo they did to lock up Sammy Watkins and put themselves in position to give long-term contracts to one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league and set up for the long-term contract of Patrick Mahomes. I mean, this is absolute financial witchcraft they're performing, and it's really a model that frickin' Bill O'Brien should be going after instead of Bill Belichick's. But I digress. That's a loss to open the season with. Week 2, Ravens. You're getting them at home. That's a benefit. So you're getting a toss-up there. The Deshaun Watson factor is heavy here. Okay? He is a dynamic threat, much like Lamar Jackson is. Deshaun does not run as well as Lamar does, but he throws far better. And he's shown a little bit more of that killer instinct, especially in the playoffs. He had to put a miracle together against the Bills, and did. So, contrast that to what Lamar did against Tennessee last year. And, yeah, that it factor is definitely there for Deshaun Watson. So, whereas I think the Ravens' roster is far superior, I think they have the better coach. I just think Deshaun Watson is in a better place in his career right this moment than Lamar Jackson is, and that brings him to the level of possibly pulling out a win. Definitely not for sure, because the Ravens are, man, that roster is stacked. They were a good playoff team last year, one of the best records in the regular season, and they added to that defense. They didn't really lose much of anything. Sure, they had to trade away a tight end, but they had 3. So, did they really lose anything there? Anyways, toss-up game week 2. Week 3 at the Steelers is another toss-up game. The Steelers have a better roster from top to bottom. Big Ben, though, is coming off of injury and is going to be rusty. So you have to take advantage of that. You got to try and find a win. Because of how good the Pittsburgh defense is, especially since they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick last year, I can't say you're guaranteed to win this game. No way am I going to guarantee a win on the road against what could potentially be the best defense in the league. But you have a chance, because your team is much better suited to be cohesive and on the same page than Pittsburgh is, considering Roethlisberger being injured most of last year and not really having the kind of offseason length that he needs to get back into full stride. All right, so Vikings, you're getting them at home. That's why it's possible that you can win. I'm not calling this a guaranteed win at all, because the Vikings are a legitimate deep run playoff team this year. They're going to win their division. They're going to win it kind of handily. And the Vikings, as a division winner in the same division that has Aaron Rodgers' Packers, yeah, that's real competition. Were this a road game, I'd say you're definitely losing. But you're getting them at home. And there's a reason Vegas gives, home teams 3 points. You play differently. Okay, it's much more loose, much more open offensive game plan, much more aggressive defensive game plan. I don't understand why everybody does that specifically at home, but it's a thing in this league and has been forever, so it's not going to change anytime soon. All right, so Jaguars. You're definitely going to beat the Jaguars. Okay, they have had a fire sale on that fantastic defense from a few years ago. They're a shell of their former selves. It's not even really worth talking too much about. At the Titans, Week 6, toss-up game. I'm being generous here. Okay, the Titans are an extremely, extremely strong team. But the Deshaun Watson factor, the simple fact that it's a division rival, you know them very well, I can't say that the Titans are just going to run all over you. This is a relatively evenly matched game because of the familiarity, so it goes into the toss-up category. Packers, you're getting them at home, so there's another toss-up game. And I got to say right now, the Texans have more games in the toss-up category for me than any other team in this league. And it's because of how weak the overall roster has become in the Bill O'Brien front office era. Deshaun Watson, being as gifted as he is the only thing carrying you to a point where wins are possible against a lot of these teams. And the fact that you're getting them at home when it's a more worrisome matchup. But the roster depth issue that has been created by mismanagement of the trades that Bill O'Brien has instituted the past few years, it really just makes it so there's a wide variance in where your season can end up. There's much less surety in all of this than there is with any other team in the league. Now, I'm not saying that as like, hey, you guys are crap. No. There's a lot of surety in DC losing. Okay? Just, there's so much up in the air for Houston because they are depending so much on Deshaun Watson. And let's face it, the guy's not a tank. Okay? He's built kind of wiry. I'm always worried that he's going to be hurt for the remainder of the season almost every time he gets sacked. And he gets sacked a lot. I'm worried about him lasting all year. I really am. Because Laramie Tunsil isn't a model of consistency staying in the lineup. And that's your best pass defender. And all of your pass defenders have to hold their position far longer because of how much Watson runs around. So it's equal. It's not all on the offensive line. They're definitely better than they were a few years ago. Just Watson extends plays a lot, and it gives defenders more opportunities to hit him. So it's a weird, weird situation calling games with a player like Watson, knowing how gifted he is and also knowing how injury prone he can be. So, that being said, this toss-up game against the Packers, they're in a similar situation you guys are. Extremely, extremely gifted quarterbacks with roster moves that haven't necessarily made cohesive sense in the rest of the roster. The coaching staff's almost depending on a talented quarterback to just carry them to the playoffs, and with both of these teams, I actually have them finishing the season with the same record, and it's not exactly the strongest one. So, bye week in week 8. It could be worse. It's mid-season, which is all right, but you want that to be later in the season if possible. At the Jaguars in week 9, toss-up game. The Jaguars have home field on their side for this game. You don't have a strong enough roster for me to say you're going to go into a division rival stadium and just step on their throat. You don't. Okay? You are leaning heavily on Deshaun Watson. By this point in the season, the Jaguars might have figured something else out on their defense. They have just let a lot of players leave. And that defensive unit's going to be just really a pushover at the beginning of the season. By now, they might have some things figured out because they do have a decent enough coaching staff, and all these guys get paid, okay? But just they're at home this time, so it's not going to be as easy as when you get them in your place. All right, at the Browns, I'm putting this in the toss-up category because Baker Mayfield and company is going to be a chaotic team. They have an extremely, extremely talented roster. They don't have very good leadership, though. You guys have extremely good leadership in Deshaun Watson, and you don't have the talent level on the roster that they do. So there's factors that you can point to for both sides to say this is a very winnable game for both sides. So that's why it's a toss-up. All right, so Patriots. I think this is a loss. In Week 11, Bill Belichick does not lose to his former disciples. Look it up, okay? Bill Belichick against coaches that came from his team. He does not lose to them. And you're getting them on the road. I think at this point in the season, the Patriots will have figured out what they are offensively. We already know what they're going to be able to do defensively. Okay, I understand they have a few roster losses on defense as well as the loss of Tom Brady. But Belichick's no chump. We're talking about one of the best coaches to ever do it in this league. And he has that advantage of just being daddy to Bill O'Brien. Okay, I just think that Bill O'Brien is going to coach this team into a loss, and it's not necessarily going to be his fault. Belichick's just holding all the cards in this matchup. All right, so at the Lions, toss-up game. Similar situations, iffy roster depth, relatively questionable coaching decisions, and an extremely, extremely gifted quarterback leading that whole mess. You're getting them on the road, which doesn't help you, but the Deshaun Watson factor brings us to a point where it's definitely winnable. You can't call it a lock. You can't. The Lions are a really well-built offense as far as skill positions go. They've done some things to address their offensive line to make it stronger than it was, but stronger than one of the worst in the league is still at best average. So you might be able to get to Stafford because he's very stationary. You might not, because those roster moves they made, especially the ones in the draft, might, by this point in the season, be cohesive enough to give him a firm pocket and turn this game into a shootout. Okay, Colts. You're getting them at home. That's a W. Okay, you don't have an extremely weak run defense, and that's really their only card. I mean, Phillip Rivers is going to be throwing lame ducks all over the field. He did all last year, and you can't blame all of those floated passes on bad offensive line play. I'm sorry, I watched enough film to see him make terrible passes when he had a clean pocket. So, he might have been seeing ghosts because he did not have a clean pocket often, but I just don't see a good offensive line fixing all of Rivers' issues from last year. I don't. So getting them at home, you're going to win because you're probably going to get 3 interceptions? I mean, towards the end of the year, Rivers' already dead arm is going to be showing itself to be catatonic. Okay? All right, so at the Bears, Week 14, putting this in the toss-up category. Normally, I would say this is a W because of the Deshaun Watson wanting to just rub the Bears' nose in the fact that they didn't draft him instead of Trubisky. But at this point in the season, I think Trubisky's going to be benched already. I think you're going to be going up against Nick Foles running Matt Nagy's offense in a desperation move for Nagy to say, hey, I still deserve a job. Just get rid of the quarterback, And I think that idea of them already benching Trubisky and kind of recognizing that they screwed it up is going to take a little of that motivation away from Deshaun Watson, making it so this is a game that's much more in question. I think that'll deflate the balloon a little bit and make it so he doesn't have necessarily the perfect mindset, that killer instinct mindset that he's going to need to just dominate a lesser team. So moving on to Week 15 with the Colts, you're on the road for the Colts, which turns this into a toss-up game. They're going to be playing their game much more, and Again, you just don't have the strength of roster for me to guarantee road games, especially against division rivals that know your team quite well. So, Bengals, that's a W. That's a win for sure, because the Bengals earned that number 1 pick by being god awful. Not even worth talking about. They're still going to be pretty damn bad. All right, so you're going to finish against the Titans. I'm calling that an absolute win. Partly because you're at home, partly because the Titans won't be starting anybody. They will have had the division sewn up already. If you watched my previous video from the AFC South, I have them finishing 11-5. If you've been paying attention, what I'm saying is an absolute lock are only 4-1. There's only 5 games that I'm 100% certain is going to be a win or a loss. Like I said at the beginning, this is the least lock games that I have out of any team in the league. Now, again, dividing up the remaining games, leaning one way or another based off of strength of schedule, I'm putting my record prediction for this team at 9-7. I think you're going against a tougher schedule than you might think. I think the roster fuckery that Bill O'Brien has had the past few years is catching up with him. I don't think they were in a strong enough position to be a lock of a division winner last year. I think he got lucky in that position. And now with Tennessee starting Ryan Tannehill from the beginning, you don't have that luck factor. They're going to win the division. You are going to be desperately fighting for the final playoff spot. Now, obviously, with only 5 games that I think are a lock, there's a lot of wiggle room here. Deshaun Watson, like I said, spackles over a lot of holes. This guy could go on an absolute tear, and you could win 12 games. He could also get hurt week 3, and you can win only those 4. So there's a lot of variance here. It's going to be a very interesting season to watch. I think you're 2 more years away from Bill O'Brien getting the boot, but I do think he's going to get the boot. I think these bad roster moves he's making are going to expose that he's just leaning on Deshaun Watson's talent in order to get him to the playoffs. It's not his coaching. It's not his management of the roster. It's Deshaun Watson's arm that's guaranteeing you a strong record, and that's it. All right, let me know what you guys think. Okay, like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Hit up my other channel, The Nerd Esports Fan, for all my video game content, which is moving over there. Hit me up on Instagram and hit me on Patreon. Okay, come the season, if you need fantasy football advice, if you need me to help you set your roster week to week, or if you just want to watch a game with me live, I'm your guy. Thanks for watching.